All right, folks. Welcome to Street City Studio. I'm John, and today we got a toy unboxing. I just recently picked up this Farm Boy Luke from the Vintage Collection. If you've been following me, you might know I'm a big Star Wars fan. Always have been since I was a kid. But as far as toy collecting goes, as far as action figures go, I was not real huge on the Star Wars the Star Wars toys growing up as a kid, because I always felt like they were at least 10 years behind other toys like GI Joe and some of the other ones. Right, once Marvel started putting out 3 3/4. But I always felt like the other lines were about 10 years further along than the Star Wars toys. So I didn't really get into Star Wars toys until about late 90s, early 2000s, I suppose. Right? Like Power of the Force and then Saga Collection and some of those. Right? And I even have some good examples. But the reason I'm saying that is because I always wanted a Farm Boy Luke, but I never liked the figures that they had. And more specifically, I might have to tip up here. We'll tip up here a little bit, right? I always wanted this representation, right? Because I always remember these posters growing up. That was the cover art for the movies and the posters. And that's how I remember Star Wars, kinda, right? And even, you know, less cartoony and less superhero-y, right? This is how I remember Luke from my earliest memories, right? But so I never had a Farm Boy Luke, and it was never the most important costume that Luke wore either. There's plenty of more action for him in later movies, I felt. So that was never the most important look for his action scenes. But I wanted to circle back around real quick and say some of those earliest figures that I was mentioning, right? Figures like this Jango Fett. I'm sure lots of you are familiar with this, right? With the molded holsters. But I remember being so impressed with those holsters, right? Actually, get out of my chair here. But just the fact that, get his arm out of the way. Just the fact that his little blasters can go in the holsters there, right? The fact that his helmets come off, his backpack comes off, the missile comes out of the backpack even, right? And even this one's just a placeholder. There's a longer one that you could actually fire, right? The arms are stuck in this kind of gunslinger position, and that was definitely what I'm talking about when I say a lot of these figures. They were good looking figures, but they were definitely a few years behind. And I had at least one more example somewhere. Where is it? Oh yeah. Right here. Another one of my favorite figures, and I've talked about it before even, if you watch all my channel, all my videos on my channel, but I'm not gonna go through and find them. So I've mentioned before, this is always, well, for like 20 years, this has been one of my go-to Luke figures, because you can swap this chest panel, right? But his hip articulation's limited. His head sculpt's not great. But if you follow me, sometimes you'll see I do, I'll pop his head off and swap it. Right, pop that head off like that and swap it for a more accurate one. Which one looks good? Which one fits good? I had one the other day. I can't remember which one it was that fit good. Maybe this one. Maybe this one here. But you can see this looks a lot better. Oh, it's kind of snug. Kind of want to get it off there quick. I don't want to... Oh, stuff spilling. I don't want to twist his neck too much and break the neck post. But you can see, just a simple head swap really makes this figure that much better. And I always kept two, just in case I didn't feel like swapping the panels, but you can swap the panel. And that was always my favorite, right? That's why I never bought the vintage collection one. I believe has just the one look, and you can't swap the panels. So he has better hip articulation on the newer one. But I never wanted, I always considered it a downgrade because you can't pop those panels and swap them. Right? And I always liked, too, I have both versions here. One with the blonder hair and one with the darker brown hair. Because just like Hasbro, I can't always decide which color I prefer. Right? But you see, that makes for good pictures. Put that head swap on there, and then you got whichever chest panel you prefer in the moment. Right, get this head back on him. There we go. Put this panel back on this one. I do, if you noticed, only one of them has the black gloved hand. I had to pop in a spare hand on him just for a placeholder. But we'll touch on some of my favorites, I guess. The black with the white revealed from his collar there, that's probably my favorite costume for Luke. It really is. But he has a lot of great looks. It's hard to pick for me which one I really like the most, right? I think that's one of the things I like about Star Wars is that these characters aren't always in the same costume, right? And sometimes maybe, right? But you got characters like Chewbacca. Chewbacca always looks the same pretty much, right? And even Han Solo, he gets a heavier coat when he's in the snow, but he's usually dressed pretty much standard. That's how he dresses, right? But back to this figure, back to Farm Boy Luke. That's a look I really needed, right? And I don't have the land speeder at the moment. I do eventually want to get that land speeder, and that'll cover some things. Because I do have some that's fine. I do have some criticism about this Luke, right? He's definitely missing a few things, right? If you look at the box art, you can tell right away he's missing the binoculars, right? And I haven't popped them open yet, but I know just from watching other reviews and looking at the release pictures and stuff, He doesn't have the long pouch on his back, right? So this Luke is specific to a very small chunk of the movie, and not even this scene, right? Because he's missing the binoculars. So this is probably trying to place it, right? Trying to place it in the movie. It would be after him and Obi-Wan sold his speeder, and maybe even, oh, I don't know, I guess the time he's getting on the Millennium Falcon, right? By that point. But then once he's on the Millennium Falcon, they end up putting on those stormtrooper suits, right? Where is it? Right? And then after he takes the stormtrooper armor off, where is it? Oh, if I can get this one off. There it is. And there it goes. There it is. There we go. All right. Right back. It took a second. But my point was, by the time they get the stormtrooper armor on and take it off, they've got the white belts. And so that look ends when they put on the stormtrooper armor, right? It's just that small window of time where he was wearing that. Maybe even the cantina. I'm trying to remember. The cantina scene might be. This might be good for the cantina scene. And boarding the Falcon. Anytime in there. But I want to go through some of these Luke figures that I do have real quick. Right? Some of my favorites. So one of my all-time favorites is this one. Get him his lightsaber back on his belt too, before we set him in the scene. Probably could have done some of this before the video. Sorry, guys. There we go. One of my favorite Lukes is the award ceremony Luke. And that's probably specifically because I read a lot of the comics where he was wearing, or at least a good handful. I read some comics while he was wearing that. I really liked that. And this one as kind of his adventures suits, right? This one looks like he's ready for work, almost like a plumber or something, right? He's really ready for some adventure, some work, hard working adventure. And this one's a little sportier, right? Almost like I don't want to say skateboarder, almost like a snowboarder or something, type of puffy jacket, right? Some tall boots. But those are probably my two favorite looks. Well, three. I should say three. Right? 1, 2, and 3. And probably in that order. Right? Favorite. Next favorite. Third favorite. Right? And I'm going to just start pulling them out at random here, I guess. But I got a bunch of Lukes because really, Luke is Star Wars for me. I know that's a whole rabbit hole people like to argue about and discuss, right? Some people think Star Wars is a story about Anakin. Some people will even prefer maybe Obi-Wan, right? I personally like Obi-Wan a lot, and I like this thing. Yes. Hold on a second. Right. Took a second. But I was saying, oh, he's too close to the light. Let's get him over here. I'm a big fan of Obi-Wan, and especially going into his Disney show. I thought, yeah, I could imagine Star Wars being from his perspective. We got the prequels, or the early 2000s trilogy was all kind of centered around him in the same way that the first trilogy was centered around Luke. But I think the way they wrapped up that series could have been better. We don't even need to get into that. But my point is, I always thought Luke was the main character. But once you get into the prequels and Luke isn't there, you have other threads like Obi-Wan and Yoda who tie it back to the originals, right? But yeah, I'm just gonna start dropping in some of these Lukes, right? Got quite a few, and I thought this was a good opportunity. See, he's kind of in a wide leg stance from sitting on his tauntaun there. But I got the Hoth Luke, and this one is one of my least favorites, but you need it to ride that tauntaun, right? Oh, this one is pretty high on my list, but them elbows really look bad. Right, he would be a lot higher on my list because of how articulated he is. He can get in a lot of good poses. The soft goods bag for Yoda, but he just doesn't look great. Right, it's too broken up. Too much flare at the joint. And on that note, I do have the other version, but it's much less articulated. The one that comes with the plastic backpack and Yoda. Now, I do like this Yoda figure a lot. I tend to use it a lot for any Dagobah scenes, just because of how dirty his cloak looks. His robes look real dirty compared to some of my other Yodas. I've got vintage collection Yoda and whatnot. Let's get him back here. In vintage collection Yoda, I find him good for the prequels, right? When he was with the Senate and the Jedi Council, and his robes were real clean looking then, so it made sense. But it doesn't make sense for any of the Dagobah scenes so much. Now we can get back to this one. This is another good example of some of the older figures that really got me into collecting Star Wars toys, right? The earlier, older figures. I never collected the original lines, but around this time, they started catching my attention, right? Especially this one. Where did I leave it? There it is. This one comes with that extra hand, right? So you can pop the tourniquet thing off and pop his hand on there like that. And I always thought that was real neat. Especially some of the bruising on his face and stuff. Right? I have the vintage collection figures, much nicer. But for certain scenes, right? Even if I pop his hand off and put this tourniquet thing on him, you know, he just doesn't look like he's in excruciating pain. That just works better, depending on what you need, right? Now, his leg articulation's real limited. But these are the figures that caught my attention and got me to follow Star Wars toys down the rabbit hole. But even now, they struggle to compete with some of these other lines sometimes. Tend to shoot themselves in the foot still with limited articulation, right? Some of these hips. And they're just now in the last couple years starting to go back through their inventory of characters, right? And give them the right articulation. So that's why I've waited so long, though, to get that Farm Boy Luke. Which other Lukes do I have? I keep going off on a side tangent. I have a few. I do have a few. We won't touch on them for too long here, maybe. Right? But I got the one with the Grogu backpack instead of the Yoda backpack. And that's kind of a nice juxtaposition with the Yoda backpack version. Try and get this light off of him. That's real strong. Let's see. Oh yeah, that did. Helped a little bit, didn't it? And I got that one from the Mandalorian light cruiser version, right? And now this one, I should say, this one is very high on my list. And even the other one, where is it? Give me just a second to find it. Alright, that didn't take too long, but the Jabba's Palace version. Oh, I'm losing space here. Let me try and scoot some of these guys back. Bring them in tighter. Now, I had ranked those guys, right, 1 through 3 as my favorites, and I kind of forgot all about these. Growing up, oh, he's not going to stand now. There we go. Growing up, there, back to the point. Growing up, I always thought that the Jabba's Palace outfit was entirely black, like this one, right? And so the only difference being the belt buckle, really. And technically the top of this outfit is wrong, right? It's supposed to look more like that all black one, right? It's supposed to look like this top, kind of, isn't it? So technically they got this top wrong, but I always thought that this was all black, and I always thought that the robe was black. And for whatever reason, I got probably up until my 20s before I realized. So I have a hard time picking between these two, with a strong leaning towards the all black, because that's how I always saw it in my head anyways. But that might be my favorite look, is the fully cloaked and all black. But then those would follow right behind. And especially, like I said, these are almost the same costume, just with the addition of the cloak and the little bit of robe or skirt bit, the hanging bit. And likewise, these two for me are practically the same as well. But they're very high on my list. Right? do have at least a good couple more. Where are they all? That's the question. Yep, here's one. I'm not going to worry about all his guns and stuff, but I do have. There he is. Stormtrooper Luke and Han. And they're not really my favorite Luke or Han, but they're not terrible, and they're very good to have for any of those scenes, and likewise for any scenes where I might need some extra stormtroopers, because if you follow, you might know I'm not much of an army builder, so this is a good little corner to cut and cheat on my army builders, right? Because they double as face figures and as army builders. And I like that a lot. I'm trying to decide. That might be a good bulk of my Lukes, right? But the point is, I really need to finish some of my original trilogy lineup, and I still need a lot, right? Because this here is the best Obi-Wan or Ben Kenobi that I have. Oh, there they go. That's okay. That's okay. And it's not very articulated at all. This is a terrible figure, but the likeness is very good. Right? You can see here he has just the swivels, swivel shoulders, swivel elbow, no leg articulation at all. Hard skirt. He couldn't sit down to save his life. But the likeness is good, so he makes for a good prop in some pictures sometimes. Right? I do like the likeness. There it is. It looks pretty good. So I keep him around until I get an upgrade. Oh. A version I forgot, right? I keep these around for... I got the belt, the poncho, and the removable helmet, all for one of these Lukes. Right? And that works pretty well. Can't remember. This might even be the figure it came with. I can't remember. But that all works good when I want to speeder bikes or Endor Luke. Let's get to it then, I think, right? That's about all I need to cover. That's a good chunk of Lukes. Let's get them Lukes out the way. And get this Luke open, because I've been dying to get him open. Been itching. Get some of these out the way. Maybe get a drink. I'll be right back. I'm going to get a drink of coffee and take just a second. Alright. That didn't take but a minute. And we are ready to crack this figure open. Now this really is the bare bones minimum for this figure. And I don't love how they release them like that. They knew, right? Just like the one that comes with the land speeder, right? The things like the weathering on his boots, the lack of the pouch and the binoculars, right? How hard would it be to have included those binoculars where I could swap it out? Even if the pouch was too hard to manage, I think at least the binoculars would have been nice, considering that they're on the box art. right? I think another thing that really bugs me is that they reversed this image, and I don't know why they do that, but they reversed that image, making the figure look inaccurate, right? Like his robe is crossed the wrong way, but it's the box art that's wrong. So that's one of the reasons I don't care too much for the box art. I know some guys really like to collect these and keep them in the box, but I don't have a lot of love for the box art. I'm here for the figures, so let me get out of the way there, and we'll just crack into them. I'm not too worried about keeping this one, so I'm not going to be very gentle. That came right open, didn't it? Paper that nobody ever reads or cares. Come on. All the tape. Oh, all the tape. I kind of love and hate these tapes. I like that the things don't fall out and get warped or lost, but sometimes this tape could be a real pain. I'll get a knife or a box cutter to open it, but I always worry I'm going to scratch something, take some paint off it. This little restraining bolt thing isn't as accessible as the lightsaber. Corners aren't coming up as easily. Yeah, I might get something to cut it. Alright. That's what we'll do. Alright, there we go. There's this restraining bolt controller, or whatever you want to call it. That's that little thing he used. He only used it like one time. Get his lightsaber hilt. Get him out. Yeah. His feet need to get flattened, but there we go. That's not too bad. Now, his hair definitely looks real flat when you compare it. Maybe a little short, a little flat, but the likeness is really good. It looks like a young Luke. I will say, just like I mentioned earlier, I think I would prefer his hair to be a little lighter, right? Especially if we were trying to achieve something like that from the box, or from the promo art, poster art. But if you're trying to achieve something like that, it still might be a little too dark. But I know they go back and forth. It's nothing new. Nothing surprising. And really, I think it is light. There's some highlights in there of lighter colors, maybe. I don't hate it. It's definitely not my favorite Luke. Oh, there it goes. And I really, how hard would it have been to give us that pouch on the back? I suppose even you could plug it into this hole here, right? But that's for the droid bolt controller. But I was saying, the only time he used it, that I can recall, was when he came into the garage and used it on C-3PO because he was hiding, right? And R2-D2 had escaped and took off, right? So Luke turned a little knob or whatever on this thing, and it made, let me get it in his hand here. There we go. And it made C-3PO jump out of hiding. Right? That was the only time he used it, but that was kind of nice. Nice that he can hold it. Nice that it can go on his little belt here, right there. But it wouldn't have been real hard to give us another hole for that pouch that's missing here. We'll stick his lightsaber on his belt too. Bend his arms and turn his hands a little bit. Try and get him looking a little more natural. Now this Luke, personally, I might never have him using his lightsaber in any real fights, right? Because this is such a young and green Luke, he's not trained, right? But I do have the Millennium Falcon, or a Millennium Falcon, right? That'd be good to get him in here. Get him doing some little training with the floating droid thing, right? But I still need that. Alright, sorry about that. I had a little technical difficulty. But I was saying I can get some good Millennium Falcon interior training type shots with him. That'd be a good use for him. And actually, thinking about it, that's exactly the use for him, because I don't have a land speeder. If I do get a land speeder, it'll be the new one that comes with the better version of this Luke. So the de facto place for him to fall is going to be inside the Millennium Falcon. And that could even explain why he doesn't have the binoculars, doesn't have sand on his boots, right? So that'll be a good place for him. He won't get seen much, but anytime somebody looks inside the Millennium Falcon, there he'll be. But I really don't want to make this video too much longer. We'll wrap it up here, I think, right? I will eventually be getting some good shots of this figure. I don't know that I'm going to be doing it in the immediate future. I've been looking at getting shots with quite a few other figures, but he's in the queue, so to speak, right? Try and squeeze him in there because I am really excited to have him. Finally, Luke in his original costume. Right? This is pretty much how we met him, with some minor discrepancies, maybe. Looking at you, Pouch. I think that's really what bugs me the most, right? I don't necessarily need that hat with the goggles on it. I don't necessarily need that poncho, because the poncho scenes weren't even in the one I grew up watching. Those were all added later, right? Except for maybe when he was on the Millennium Falcon and Leia wraps him in it. But at that point, without the scenes before it, you got no context. It's just a blanket, right? But it'll be nice to get some shots. Millennium Falcon shots, because some of these other figures I have, right, they weren't great for A New Hope shots, right? The only, I think this one, right, there's there's my only other New Hope Luke, right? Well, maybe this one too, actually. I shouldn't say that. This one. But I don't have a ship for him. So this one almost gets no action whatsoever. Right? I do have a hanger backdrop, just a cardboard backdrop that I can drop him into. But he's kind of just been sitting around waiting. I thought maybe I'd use him for some Dagobah shots, or maybe even fake some interiors, right? Make some interiors for some ships. But I haven't found a lot of use for this one yet. So I feel like he's gonna fall into that same boat. But we'll try and get some use out of him soon. But like I said, I think we'll wrap it up right there. I got a few other things I gotta get to today. As always, I appreciate you guys coming by and checking out my new toy, checking out my video. I don't usually say it, but if you want, I'd love to hear some feedback, some comments, even just say hi, what's up. Hope you guys are doing well, having a good day. Keep playing with them toys, and I'll talk to you again real soon.